behind the golden gates of Ravencrest Palace, where tradition and protocol rule every breath. A single moment of disrespect would shatter centuries of royal dignity. What started as a simple tea party for 8-year-old Princess Isabella would end with the most powerful woman in the kingdom being dragged away in chains, her crown replaced with prison bars. This is the true story of how one woman's jealousy and cruelty toward an innocent child brought down the most feared figure in the royal court. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as Lady Camilla Worthington adjusted her emerald tiara one final time. As the Queen's sister and second most powerful woman in the kingdom, she commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Her sharp green eyes surveyed the grand ballroom being prepared for Princess Isabella's 8th birthday celebration, and her lips curved into what others might mistake for a smile, but those who knew her recognized as something far more calculating. Princess Isabella, the beloved daughter of Queen Victoria and heir to the throne, was everything Lady Camilla despised. The child was naturally charming, genuinely kind, and, worst of all, she held the one thing Camilla had always coveted, the unconditional love and respect of the people. While Camilla had spent 43 years clawing her way to power through manipulation and intimidation, this 8-year-old girl effortlessly commanded the adoration that Camilla felt should rightfully be hers. The birthday preparations were elaborate, as befitting a future queen. Hundreds of white roses adorned every surface, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light, casting rainbow patterns across the walls. A string quartet practiced softly in the corner while servants bustled about, arranging delicate pastries and preparing the finest china for the afternoon tea that would follow the ceremony. Captain Marcus Blackwood, head of the Royal Guard, stood at attention near the main entrance. His dark uniform was pristine, every metal polished to perfection. At 35, he had served the royal family for over a decade, but his loyalty belonged entirely to Princess Isabella and Queen Victoria. He had watched the little princess grow from a toddling infant into a bright, compassionate child, and he would die before allowing any harm to come to her. Marcus had noticed Lady Camilla's behavior toward the princess over the years. The way her smile never reached her eyes when Isabella entered a room. The subtle comments designed to undermine the child's confidence. The deliberate exclusion from family discussions that concerned Isabella's future. Most disturbing of all were the increasingly bold attempts to humiliate the princess in public, always disguised as jokes or accidents that could never quite be proven intentional. The other members of the royal court had learned to look the other way. Lady Camilla's wrath was legendary, and crossing her meant social exile, financial ruin, or worse. She had destroyed careers with a single word, ruined marriages with a whispered rumor, and sent entire families into disgrace. Even Queen Victoria, despite her love for her daughter, often found it easier to smooth over Camilla's transgressions rather than confront her directly. But Captain Blackwood was different. His oath was to protect the royal family, and that included protecting them from threats within the palace walls. He had been quietly documenting Lady Camilla's behavior, building a case that he hoped would never need to be used. Unfortunately, he was about to discover that some people's cruelty knows no bounds, even when it comes to innocent children. As the morning progressed, guests began arriving for the celebration. Nobles from across the kingdom, foreign dignitaries, and prominent citizens filled the palace halls. Princess Isabella moved among them with natural grace, her blue silk dress adorned with tiny pearls that caught the light as she curtsied and thanked each guest for coming. Her golden hair was braided with white ribbons, and her bright blue eyes sparkled with genuine happiness. Lady Camilla watched from across the room, her jaw clenched as she observed the easy way people gravitated toward the child. Lords and ladies who barely acknowledged Camilla's presence lit up when Isabella approached them. Children who had been stiff and formal all morning began laughing and playing when the princess suggested games. Even the usually stern foreign ambassadors smiled warmly as Isabella practiced the few words of their languages she had been learning. The breaking point came during the gift presentation ceremony. Princess Isabella had received beautiful dolls, rare books, jewelry fit for a queen, and exotic treasures from distant lands. She thanked each gift giver personally, her genuine gratitude making even the most expensive presents seem worthwhile. The crowd murmured appreciatively at her good manners and natural charm. Then came Lady Camillia's turn. She approached the princess with a wrapped box, her smile sharp as broken glass. "My dear Isabella," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I have something very special for you. Something that I think perfectly represents what you truly are." Princess Isabella accepted the box with both hands, as she had been taught, and began carefully unwrapping it. The crowd watched expectantly, cameras flashing as the moment was documented for the royal archives. But as the wrapping fell away and Isabella opened the box, her face went pale. Inside was not a gift, but a collection of items that could only be described as cruel mockery. A broken doll with its face scratched out. A child's book with pages torn and words scribbled over in red ink. A cheap plastic tiara cracked down the middle. And, sitting on top of it all, a note written in Lady Camillia's distinctive handwriting for a pretend princess who doesn't deserve what she has. The ballroom fell silent. Even the string quartet stopped playing. Princess Isabella stared at the contents of the box, her young mind struggling to understand why someone would want to hurt her on her birthday, in front of everyone she loved. Tears began to well up in her eyes, but she fought them back, trying to maintain the composure expected of a future queen. Queen Victoria gasped from her throne, finally, seeing her sister's cruelty displayed so blatantly that it could not be dismissed or excused. The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they had witnessed an elaborate joke they didn't understand or something far more sinister. But it was Lady Camillia's next words that sealed her fate. She leaned down toward Isabella, speaking just loudly enough for those nearby to hear, but maintaining the pretense of whispering privately to the child. "You think everyone loves you," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "But they only pretend because they have to. You're nothing special, just a spoiled little girl who happened to be born into the right family. You'll never be half the queen your mother is, and everyone knows it." Princess Isabella's composure finally cracked. The 8-year-old began to cry, not the dramatic sobs of a tantrum, but the quiet, heartbroken tears of a child whose world had just been shattered by someone she trusted. She clutched the broken tiara to her chest, unable to understand what she had done to deserve such cruelty. That was when Captain Marcus Blackwood stepped forward. He had heard every word, seen every cruel gesture, and witnessed the deliberate destruction of an innocent child's happiness. His hand moved to his sword, not to draw it, but to rest on its hilt as he made a decision that would change everything. "Lady Camilla Worthington." His voice rang out across the silent ballroom, formal and commanding, by the authority vested in me as captain of the royal guard and protector of the royal family, I place you under arrest for crimes against the crown. The guests erupted in shocked murmurs. Lady Camilla whirled around, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You dare!" she shrieked. "I am the queen's sister. You have no authority over me." But Captain Blackwood was already signaling to his men, who had been positioned throughout the room. They moved with military precision, surrounding Lady Camilla before she could retreat or call for help from her own supporters among the court. The crime of causing deliberate harm to the heir to the throne, Marcus continued, his voice never wavering. The crime of public humiliation of a member of the royal family, and the crime of conduct unbecoming of a noble bearing the royal name. These charges carry the penalty of imprisonment and loss of all titles and privileges. Queen Victoria rose from her throne, her own shock giving way to a mother's fury. For too long, she had allowed her sister's behavior to continue unchecked, telling herself that family loyalty required her to protect Camilla from the consequences of her actions. But seeing her daughter's tears, witnessing the calculated cruelty inflicted on an innocent child, she finally understood that some lines should never be crossed. "Captain Blackwood," the Queen said, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority, "you have my full support. Remove her from my sight and from this palace immediately." Lady Camilla's face went through a range of emotions: shock, rage, disbelief, and, finally, desperate fear as she realized that her position and power could not protect her from the consequences of her actions. She had always believed that her relationship to the Queen made her untouchable, that her political connections and accumulated secrets would shield her from any real punishment. "Victoria, you can't allow this," she pleaded, her imperious mask finally slipping to reveal the scared, bitter woman underneath. "I'm your sister. We're family." But Queen Victoria had turned away, gathering Princess Isabella in her arms and whispering comfort to her sobbing daughter. The sight of her child's broken heart had burned away any lingering family loyalty she might have felt. As the royal guards moved to escort Lady Camilla from the ballroom, she made one final, desperate attempt to maintain her power. She pulled free from their grasp and pointed an accusing finger at Captain Blackwood. "This is treason," she screamed. "I'll have you executed for this. I know secrets that could destroy this entire royal family. You'll all regret crossing me." But her threats fell on deaf ears. The guests watched in fascination and horror as one of the most powerful women in the kingdom was reduced to making empty threats while being forcibly removed from a child's birthday party. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The woman who had built her reputation on humiliating others was now experiencing the ultimate humiliation herself. Captain Blackwood followed the procession as Lady Camilla was escorted through the palace halls. Servants pressed against the walls as they passed, their eyes wide with disbelief. Word of the arrest was already spreading through the palace like wildfire, and by evening, the entire kingdom would know that the untouchable Lady Camilla had finally been brought down. As they reached the palace dungeons, Lady Camilla made one last attempt to escape justice. She offered Captain Blackwood riches, political position, even her own connections, and influence if he would only let her go. When bribery failed, she resorted to threats, promising to destroy his career and his family if he continued with the arrest. But Marcus Blackwood had made his choice the moment he saw Princess Isabella's tears. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, and that included protecting them from those who would use their position to cause harm. As the heavy doors of the dungeon's cell closed behind Lady Camilla, he felt not triumph, but a deep satisfaction that justice had finally been served. Back in the ballroom, Queen Victoria held her daughter close while the guests slowly began to disperse. The birthday celebration was effectively over, but something more important had taken place. The royal family had finally stood up to the bully who had terrorized them for years, and the kingdom had witnessed that even the most powerful could not escape justice when they chose cruelty over compassion. Princess Isabella wiped her tears and looked up at her mother with eyes that held a new understanding of the world's complexity. She had learned a hard lesson about trust and family loyalty, but she had also seen that good people would stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. The broken tiara still lay in the discarded gift box, its cracked surface reflecting the fractured relationship between the royal sisters. But Princess Isabella was no longer looking at it. Instead, she was watching Captain Blackwood return to the ballroom, his duty completed, his oath fulfilled, and his conscience clear. The first chapter of this royal drama had ended with justice served and a child's innocence protected, but the story was far from over. Lady Camilla's arrest would send shockwaves through the kingdom, and her imprisonment would reveal secrets and conspiracies that no one could have imagined. The woman who had spent her life destroying others would soon discover what it felt like to have her own world crumble around her. As night fell over Ravencrest Palace, Princess Isabella fell asleep in her mother's arms, safe in the knowledge that there were people who would protect her from those who wished her harm. But in the dungeons below, Lady Camilla stared at the stone walls of her cell and began planning her revenge, unaware that her worst days still lay ahead. The stone walls of Ravencrest Palace's dungeon had not held a prisoner of noble birth for over 2 centuries, but Lady Camilla Worthington found herself becoming intimately acquainted with their cold, unforgiving surface. 3 days had passed since her dramatic arrest at Princess Isabella's birthday celebration, and the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in through the haze of rage and disbelief that had sustained her thus far. The cell was small, but not deliberately cruel. After all, she was still technically a member of the royal family, despite her crimes. A narrow cot with rough blankets occupied one corner, while a simple wooden table and chair provided minimal comfort. A small window, barely large enough for her hand to fit through, offered a view of nothing but the palace courtyard where she had once walked freely among the flowers and fountains. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the psychological torture of her situation. Lady Camilla had spent her entire adult life as one of the most feared and respected women in the kingdom. Nobles had competed for her attention, servants had trembled in her presence, and even Queen Victoria had deferred to her wishes more often than not. Now she was reduced to waiting for a guard to bring her meals and empty her waste bucket. Captain Marcus Blackwood made daily visits to check on his prisoner, partly out of professional duty and partly to ensure that she was not attempting to escape or harm herself. Each time he appeared at her cell door, Lady Camilla launched into another tirade, alternating between threats, bribes, and desperate pleas for release. Marcus listened impassively, making notes in his official record, but never responding to her increasingly frantic attempts at manipulation. On the 4th morning of her imprisonment, Lady Camilla received her first visitor from the outside world. Lord Edmund Ashworth, her longtime political ally and rumored romantic interest, had finally gained permission to see her. Edmund was a man of considerable influence in the royal court, serving as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and his support had been crucial to many of Lady Camilla's machinations over the years. Edmund entered the dungeon with visible reluctance, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of stress. His graying hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled, and his pale blue eyes held the haunted look of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. "Camilla," he said quietly, his voice echoing in the stone chamber, "what have you done?" Lady Camilla rushed to the bars of her cell, her fingers wrapping around the cold metal as she pressed her face between them. "Edmund, thank goodness you're here. You have to help me. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. That guard has overstepped his authority, and Victoria has lost her mind. You need to convince her to release me immediately." But Edmund stepped back from the cell, his expression troubled. "The entire kingdom is talking about what happened at the princess's birthday party. The witnesses all tell the same story, Camilla. They say you deliberately humiliated that child in the most public way possible. How could you do such a thing? She had it coming." Lady Camilla snapped, her facade of victimhood cracking to reveal the venom underneath. "That spoiled little brat has been the center of attention for too long. Someone needed to teach her that the world doesn't revolve around her precious little feelings." Edmund stared at his longtime ally with growing horror. "She's 8 years old, Camilla. 8 years old. And she's done nothing to deserve your hatred except exist. She exists in my place." Lady Camilla screamed, her voice bouncing off the stone walls. "I should be the one they love. I should be the one they celebrate. I've given my entire life to this kingdom. And for what? To watch a child receive everything I've worked for." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Edmund gradually realizing that the woman he thought he knew had been consumed by a jealousy so deep and toxic that it had warped her perception of reality. Lady Camilla spoke of elaborate plots to undermine Princess Isabella's education, of deliberately scheduling events to conflict with the child's important milestones, and of spreading subtle rumors designed to make people question the princess's fitness to rule. Most disturbing of all were her future plans. Lady Camilla had been working to arrange a marriage between Princess Isabella and Prince Henrik of Nordland, a boy known for his cruel temperament and violent outbursts. The match would have been politically advantageous for the kingdom, but Edmund now realized it was motivated entirely by Lady Camilla's desire to see the princess trapped in an abusive relationship. "You're sick," Edmund whispered, backing toward the door. "I came here thinking I could help you, but you're beyond help. You need to pray that Queen Victoria shows you more mercy than you've shown her daughter." After Edmund left, Lady Camilla spent the rest of the day pacing her small cell like a caged animal. The reality of her isolation was becoming clear. If even her closest ally was abandoning her, she truly had no one left to turn to. But rather than accepting responsibility for her actions, she began plotting revenge against everyone who had wronged her. Meanwhile, in the palace above, the investigation into Lady Camilla's activities was revealing a pattern of behavior far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Captain Blackwood had assigned his most trusted investigators to examine her private quarters, correspondence, and financial records. What they found painted a picture of systematic cruelty and manipulation that stretched back years. Queen Victoria sat in her private study, reading through report after report of her sister's misdeeds. Each page revealed new depths of betrayal and cruelty that left her questioning how she could have been so blind to what was happening under her own roof. Letters showed Lady Camilla deliberately scheduling Princess Isabella's tutoring sessions to conflict with important social events, ensuring the child would miss opportunities to develop relationships with other noble families. Financial records revealed that Lady Camilla had been secretly funding opposition newspapers that published criticism of the royal family's parenting decisions, particularly focusing on what they portrayed as Princess Isabella's sheltered upbringing. She had even paid for pamphlets to be distributed questioning whether an 8-year-old could truly understand the responsibilities of future queenship. Most heartbreaking of all were the testimonies from palace servants who had finally found the courage to speak about what they had witnessed over the years. Maids reported finding Princess Isabella crying in hidden corners of the palace after particularly cruel encounters with her aunt. Kitchen staff described how Lady Camilla would deliberately order the child's least favorite foods for family dinners, then mock her for being difficult when she didn't eat. The royal tutor, Professor Margaret Whitmore, provided perhaps the most damaging testimony. She revealed that Lady Camilla had been secretly undermining Princess Isabella's education by providing incorrect information about royal history and protocol, then publicly embarrassing the child when she repeated these mistakes in formal settings. The professor had tried to address the issue directly with Lady Camilla, only to be threatened with dismissal if she continued to interfere. As the evidence mounted, Queen Victoria began to understand that her sister's arrest was not an overreaction to a single incident, but long overdue justice for years of systematic psychological abuse. The woman she had protected and defended was revealed to be a predator who had been methodically destroying her own niece's childhood and self-confidence. The 5th day of Lady Camilla's imprisonment brought another visitor, though this one was far less welcome. Father Benedict Morrison, the palace chaplain, came not as a friend, but as a representative of moral authority. The elderly priest had served the royal family for over 3 decades and had watched Princess Isabella grow from infancy with the loving eye of a grandfather figure. "Lady Camilla," Father Benedict said solemnly as he approached her cell, "I come to offer you the opportunity for confession and repentance before your trial begins." Lady Camilla laughed bitterly. Repentance? For what? For speaking the truth to a spoiled child? For trying to prepare her for the realities of leadership? "I won't apologize for doing what everyone else was too weak to do." Father Benedict studied her carefully, seeing not defiance but desperation in her eyes. "Child, you have allowed jealousy and bitterness to poison your soul. Princess Isabella is an innocent girl who has done nothing to earn your hatred. Your actions at her birthday celebration revealed a heart so consumed with darkness that you would cruel to a child in front of hundreds of witnesses. Don't lecture me about darkness. Lady Camilla snarled. I've seen what real power looks like, and it's not pretty tea parties and curtsy lessons. That little girl will be eaten alive when she becomes queen, and I was trying to toughen her up. By breaking her spirit, Father Benedict asked quietly. By making her doubt her worth? By teaching her that cruelty is normal and expected? What kind of queen do you think she would become after years of such treatment? For a moment, Lady Camilla's mask slipped, and the priest saw something that might have been regret flicker across her features. But it was quickly replaced by cold calculation. She would become the kind of queen this kingdom needs, Lady Camilla said finally. Hard, ruthless, willing to do whatever it takes to maintain power. Just like me. Father Benedict shook his head sadly. No, child. She would become just like you, bitter, lonely, and consumed with hatred. Is that truly the legacy you want to leave? After the priest departed, Lady Camilla found herself alone with thoughts that grew darker by the hour. The conversations with Edmund and Father Benedict had forced her to confront the reality of her situation. But instead of promoting self-reflection, they had only strengthened her resolve to make everyone pay for her humiliation. She began planning her escape with the methodical precision that had once made her such an effective political operator. The dungeon was old, and she had noticed several weaknesses in its construction during her days of careful observation. The lock on her cell was ancient, and she had managed to work one of the pins loose using a piece of metal from her cot frame. The guards followed predictable patterns, and there was a 15-minute window each night when the corridor was completely unmonitored. But Lady Camilla's plans extended far beyond simple escape. She had spent years cultivating relationships with foreign powers, some of them hostile to Queen Victoria's rule. If she could reach the border, she could seek asylum with Prince Valdric of the Eastern Territories, who had long coveted the trade routes controlled by the kingdom. In exchange for military support to reclaim her position, she was prepared to offer him information about the kingdom's defenses and political weaknesses. The most crucial part of her plan involved Princess Isabella herself. Lady Camilla had realized that her greatest weapon against the royal family was their love for the child. If she could kidnap the princess and hold her hostage, she could force Queen Victoria to abdicate in her favor. The kingdom would never risk harm coming to their beloved future queen. As night fell on the 7th day of her imprisonment, Lady Camilla put her escape plan into motion. Using the loosened pin, she had managed to create a crude lockpick from pieces of her cot frame. The lock was more complex than she had initially realized, but years of watching palace locksmiths had given her a basic understanding of the mechanism. The first part of her plan worked perfectly. She managed to unlock her cell door during the guard's dinner break and slip into the corridor without detection. The dungeons were connected to the palace's ancient tunnel system, originally built as escape routes during times of war. Lady Camilla had explored these tunnels as a child, and though decades had passed, she still remembered the basic layout. Moving through the darkness with only memory as her guide, she made her way toward the tunnel that would bring her closest to the royal quarters. Her plan was to capture Princess Isabella while the child slept, then use the same tunnel system to escape the palace grounds entirely. Once she had the princess as a hostage, she could dictate terms to Queen Victoria and reclaim her rightful place in the kingdom. But as Lady Camilla crept through the ancient passages, she was unaware that her escape had not gone unnoticed. Captain Blackwood had suspected that she might attempt something desperate, and he had positioned additional guards at strategic points throughout the palace. When a regular cell check revealed her absence, alarms were immediately raised, and the entire palace guard mobilized to track her down. The tunnels that had seemed so familiar in her memory proved confusing in the darkness. Decades of disuse had caused some passages to become blocked with debris, while others had partially collapsed. What should have been a 15-minute journey to the royal quarters stretched into hours of frustrating wrong turns and dead ends. Meanwhile, Princess Isabella slept peacefully in her bed, unaware of the danger creeping toward her through the darkness below. She had spent the week since her birthday celebration surrounded by extra love and attention from her mother and the palace staff, all of whom were trying to help her heal from the trauma of her aunt's cruelty. The child had shown remarkable resilience, choosing to focus on the fact that so many people had come to her defense rather than dwelling on the hurt that had been inflicted upon her. Queen Victoria had barely slept since Lady Camilla's arrest, tormented by guilt over the years of abuse she had failed to prevent. She had stationed additional guards outside Princess Isabella's room and checked on her daughter multiple times each night, but even these precautions could not quiet her fears about what her sister might be capable of. It was nearly 3 a.m. when Lady Camilla finally found the correct tunnel and began her ascent toward the palace proper. She emerged through a hidden panel in the library, just down the corridor from the royal bedchambers. Her clothes were torn and dirty from crawling through the ancient passages. Her hair was wild with dust and cobwebs, and her eyes held the desperate gleam of someone who had nothing left to lose. But as she crept toward Princess Isabella's room, Lady Camilla failed to notice the figure watching her from the shadows. Captain Blackwood had anticipated that she would target the princess, and he had been waiting in the corridor for over an hour, ready to protect the child he had sworn to defend. The confrontation that followed would determine not only Lady Camilla's fate, but the future of the entire kingdom. Her escape had revealed the true depths of her obsession with Princess Isabella, and her willingness to harm an innocent child to achieve her goals. The woman who had once been the second most powerful person in the kingdom was about to discover that there were some lines that, once crossed, led to consequences far worse than imprisonment. Captain Marcus Blackwood stood motionless in the shadows of the palace corridor, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he watched Lady Camilla creep toward Princess Isabella's bedchamber. The escaped prisoner moved with desperate stealth, unaware that every step was being observed by the man who had sworn to protect the royal family with his life. As Lady Camilla reached for the handle of the princess's door, Marcus stepped forward from the darkness, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Going somewhere, Lady Camilla?" She spun around with a gasp, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the corridor windows. For a moment, they stared at each other, the disgraced noblewoman and the captain who had destroyed her world with a single arrest. Lady Camilla's eyes darted between Marcus and the door behind her, calculating whether she could complete her mission before he could stop her. "You should have stayed in your cell," Marcus said quietly, drawing his sword with practiced ease. "Escaping prison is one thing, but attempting to harm the princess is treason punishable by death." Lady Camilla's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Harm her? I'm trying to save this kingdom from the disaster she'll cause when she becomes queen. That spoiled child will be the ruin of us all." "She's 8 years old," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "And the only disaster here is what you've become." The sound of their voices had awakened Princess Isabella, who appeared in her doorway wearing a white nightgown and rubbing sleep from her eyes. The sight of her beloved Captain Blackwood facing off against her aunt in the corridor confused and frightened her, but she was too young to fully understand the danger she had been in. "Captain Marcus?" Isabella's voice was small and uncertain. "What's happening? Why is Aunt Camilla here?" The moment of distraction was all Lady Camilla needed. She lunged forward, not toward Marcus, but toward the child, her hands outstretched to grab Princess Isabella. But Marcus had anticipated her desperation, and he moved with the speed and precision that had made him the youngest captain in the Royal Guard's history. His sword caught Lady Camilla's wrist in a motion so quick that she barely saw it coming. The blade didn't cut deep. Marcus was too skilled to cause unnecessary harm, but it was enough to stop her attack and send her stumbling backward against the corridor wall. "Isabella, go back to your room and lock the door," Marcus commanded without taking his eyes off Lady Camilla. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. But Princess Isabella, despite her youth, had inherited her mother's courage and sense of responsibility. Instead of retreating, she stepped forward, her small voice carrying surprising authority. "Aunt Camilla, why do you hate me so much? What did I do to make you so angry?" Lady Camilla stared at her niece, breathing heavily as she clutched her wounded wrist. The child's genuine confusion and hurt seemed to break something inside her, and for the first time since her arrest, she spoke without calculation or manipulation. "You didn't do anything," she whispered, her voice cracking with years of suppressed pain. "You didn't have to. You were born with everything I ever wanted, everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed for. And you got it all without trying, without earning it, without paying the price I paid." "What price?" Isabella asked, taking another step forward despite Captain Marcus's protective gesture. Tears began streaming down Lady Camilla's face as she slumped against the wall. "I gave up love, friendship, happiness, everything that makes life worth living. I became hard and cruel because I thought that was what power required. I destroyed every relationship I ever had because I believed strength meant standing alone. And for what? So I could watch a child receive effortlessly what I could never achieve through all my scheming and manipulation." The confession hung in the air like a physical weight. Captain Marcus kept his sword raised, but he could see that the fight had gone out of Lady Camilla. She was no longer a dangerous escaped prisoner, but a broken woman finally confronting the choices that had led her to this moment. Queen Victoria appeared at the end of the corridor, having been awakened by the guard's alarm about the escape. She took in the scene. Her sister collapsed against the wall, her daughter standing brave but confused in the doorway, and Captain Blackwood maintaining his protective stance between them. "Camilla," Queen Victoria said, her voice heavy with sorrow rather than anger. "Look what you've become. Look what your jealousy has turned you into." Lady Camilla looked up at her sister, and, for a moment, they were just two women who had once been children playing in these same palace corridors. "I wanted to be you, Victoria. I wanted to be the one people loved, the one they celebrated, the one who mattered. But I was born second, and second was never good enough for me." "You could have been loved," Queen Victoria replied, moving slowly down the corridor. "You could have been celebrated for your intelligence, your political skills, your dedication to the kingdom. But you chose to tear others down instead of building yourself up." Princess Isabella, with the startling wisdom that sometimes comes from innocence, walked over to her aunt despite Captain Marcus's concerned protest. She looked up at the woman who had caused her so much pain and asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. "Do you want to be friends now? We could start over. I don't understand grown-up things, but I know that being mean makes people sad. Maybe if you stopped being mean, you wouldn't be so sad anymore." Lady Camilla stared down at her niece in shock. After everything she had done, the cruelty, the humiliation, the attempt at kidnapping, this child was offering her friendship and forgiveness. It was more grace than she had shown to anyone in decades, more mercy than she deserved. But instead of accepting the olive branch, Lady Camilla's face hardened again. The years of bitterness and hatred could not be erased by a single moment of clarity, and the toxic patterns of thought that had consumed her life reasserted themselves. "I don't want your pity," she snarled, pushing herself away from the wall. "And I don't want your friendship. You're still just a spoiled child who doesn't understand what real power costs." It was her final mistake. By rejecting Princess Isabella's genuine offer of reconciliation, Lady Camilla had chosen to remain the villain of her own story. Queen Victoria's expression shifted from sorrow to cold determination, and Captain Marcus stepped forward with renewed resolve. "Take her back to the dungeons," Queen Victoria commanded. "Double the guards, and prepare for her trial. She's had her chance for redemption and thrown it away." As the guards arrived to escort Lady Camilla back to her cell, she made one last attempt at manipulation. "You think this is over?" she called out as they dragged her down the corridor. "I have allies, secrets that could destroy this kingdom. You'll regret treating me like a common criminal." But her threats fell on deaf ears. The investigation into her activities had already revealed most of her secrets, and her escape attempt had shown that she posed a genuine danger to the royal family. There would be no more chances, no more family loyalty to protect her from the consequences of her choices. The trial of Lady Camilla Worthington began 3 weeks later and became the most sensational legal proceeding in the kingdom's history. Nobles, commoners, and foreign dignitaries packed the royal courthouse to witness the fall of one of the most powerful women in the realm. The evidence presented painted a picture of systematic cruelty and calculated manipulation that shocked even those who had known Lady Camilla for years. Witness after witness testified about her abuse of Princess Isabella, her political machinations, and her attempts to undermine the royal family from within. The broken birthday gift was entered as evidence, along with the cruel note that had accompanied it. Palace servants spoke tearfully about the times they had found the princess crying after encounters with her aunt. Most damaging of all was the testimony about her escape attempt and planned kidnapping. Captain Blackwood described in detail how he had found Lady Camilla creeping toward Princess Isabella's room in the middle of the night, armed with plans to use the child as a hostage to regain her power. Lady Camilla's defense was weak and contradictory. Her lawyer, appointed by the court since no one would voluntarily represent her, argued that she had been driven to desperation by years of being overshadowed by her niece. But the argument that jealousy justified child abuse found no sympathy among the judges or the public. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all charges. The sentence was equally clear: life imprisonment with loss of all titles, properties, and privileges. Lady Camilla Worthington would spend the rest of her days in a remote prison, forgotten by the society she had once tried to dominate. But the story's end was not about Lady Camilla's punishment. It was about healing and growth. Princess Isabella, despite the trauma she had endured, emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of both cruelty and kindness. She had seen how jealousy and bitterness could corrupt even family members, but she had also witnessed how good people would stand up to protect the innocent. Queen Victoria used the crisis as an opportunity to reform the royal court, removing other toxic influences and creating a more supportive environment for her daughter's development. She established new protocols for protecting royal children from psychological abuse and mandated regular evaluations of all palace staff and noble courtiers. Captain Marcus Blackwood was promoted to Marshal of the Royal Guard and became Princess Isabella's primary protector and mentor. His courage in standing up to Lady Camilla, despite the political risks, made him a hero throughout the kingdom and demonstrated that true loyalty meant protecting those you serve, even from their own family members. The broken tiara from Princess Isabella's birthday was melted down and reformed into a new crown, smaller and simpler than the traditional royal regalia, but stronger for having been rebuilt. It became a symbol of resilience and the idea that even things that are broken can be made beautiful again. 5 years later, Princess Isabella, now 13 and wiser beyond her years, stood at the window of her private study, looking out at the palace gardens where she once played as a child. Captain Marcus, now Marshal Blackwood, stood beside her as they reviewed her lessons in statecraft and diplomacy. "Do you ever think about her?" Isabella asked, not needing to specify who she meant. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think about the choices she made and how they led her to where she is now. I think about how different things might have been if she had chosen love over hatred, building others up instead of tearing them down. I used to have nightmares about that night," Isabella admitted. "But now I think about how many people came to protect me. You, Mother, the servants who testified, even the people who came to my birthday party and saw what happened. I learned that for every person who might want to hurt you, there are usually many more who want to help." It was a lesson that would serve Princess Isabella well when she eventually became Queen Isabella the Wise, known throughout history for her compassion, her ability to unite opposing factions, and her talent for turning former enemies into allies. The child who had been targeted for destruction by her own aunt grew up to become one of the most beloved monarchs in the kingdom's history. Lady Camilla Worthington died in prison 12 years later, alone and unremembered except as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy and the importance of choosing kindness over cruelty. Her name was struck from the royal family tree, and her portrait was removed from the palace halls, leaving no trace of her existence except in the official court records of her crimes. But perhaps the most fitting end to her story came in a letter that Princess Isabella, by then Queen Isabella, wrote to be placed in the royal archives. It read simply, "I forgave my aunt not because she deserved it, but because forgiveness freed me from the burden of hatred that had destroyed her. May future generations learn from her mistakes and choose a better path." The broken tiara had indeed been reformed into something beautiful, and the child who had once been its victim grew up to embody the strength and grace that Lady Camilla had spent her life trying to destroy. In the end, love and protection triumphed over jealousy and cruelty, proving that even the darkest chapters can lead to the most inspiring conclusions. The royal guards still patrol the palace corridors, protecting each new generation of princes and princesses, carrying with them the memory of Captain Marcus Blackwood and his unwavering commitment to defending the innocent. And in the palace gardens, where Princess Isabella once cried over a broken gift, flowers bloom eternal as a reminder that beauty can grow from even the most painful experiences. The kingdom prospered under Queen Isabella's rule, and the story of her 8th birthday became legendary, not as a tale of cruelty, but as a testament to the power of good people standing up for what is right, even when it means confronting those closest to them. It remains a reminder that true nobility comes not from birth or title, but from the courage to protect the vulnerable and the wisdom to choose love over hatred, no matter the cost.